Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to another edition of Talking Point. My name is Farhaaz Patel. We are coming to you live from Hilaal TV channel 347 on DSTV. I'll be in your company for the next 45 to 50 minutes. In the ever-changing world of politics, there's going to be another election that is happening, and this time with the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance. They'll be having their federal election next month at Gallagher Estate in Midrand to elect a new leader. The current leader, John Steenhuisen, will be contesting for a second term, but he'll be not alone. He'll be, of course, joined by Dr. Mpho Phalatse, who is my guest today, as she will look to take up the mantle as the DA leader. She now joins me in studio. Dr. Phalatse, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thanks for having me.
Wa alaikum salam. Now, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Dr. Phalatse, the decision to run for the DA leader post, I know you've mentioned a number of factors as to why you'd want to. We will be going deep into that. But just when you launched your manifesto, it was clear you believe that you are right now the right leader at the right time for the party.
Absolutely. When you choose a leader for a party, you look at the season, you look at the type of leadership you require for that season. This is where I believe we are as a country. I believe that for the first time we're going to see the ANC dip below 50% in the national election. I believe that for the first time the DA could position itself to be part of a leading and governing coalition to take South Africa forward. I do believe, however, that the DA needs to internally work on the barriers that stunt our growth as a party, and I believe that that has a lot to do with our ability to connect with the masses in South Africa, the majority of South Africans. And that's the kind of leadership I want to bring that's going to help us connect better with the majority of South Africans so we can get the kind of mandate that we need to take this country forward.
We're going to break down all of what you just mentioned, Dr. Phalatse. You, of course, were the Johannesburg mayor just over a month ago. I don't want to delve into what had happened there. You bring that leadership experience with you. Now, taken from what you have done from a metro to a national perspective, what sort of leadership qualities would you bring to a national perspective?
So there are codependencies between our governments and our national leadership. If you look at the type of coalition that I led in Johannesburg, it was unstable at best. 13 months, very turbulent. I was ousted more than once. In fact, the final ousting was the second one, with the initial one having been deemed illegal by the courts. But we could not really settle and govern and show our difference from the ANC to our residents ahead of the 2024 election to help them make a decision as to who they want to take this country forward. And if you look at what really influenced our governance, we were in a coalition. We were in a 9-party coalition at some point. We started shedding some partners in that coalition that saw the ousting of our speaker, and then it was downhill from then onwards. But there's so much to do with also national leadership and how relationships play out at a national level between the different political parties. And therefore it calls for a certain type of leadership. We're moving into collaborative politics. We're moving away from politics where one party can govern in a majority government to the type of governance that requires consultation, that requires compromise, that requires flexibility, and just an ability to work well with potential partners. That's the type of politics we're moving into. Hopefully not for long. I hope that it's just a transitional measure to take us into a more stable form of politics where we can have bigger parties that can be trusted, that are for the people. But this is where we find ourselves now. And yes, unfortunately, in the course of things, the feedback that we would get from our partners is that they find it particularly difficult to work with my party in particular. And I do believe that is a function of the type of leadership that we have at the moment. And I believe that with a different type of leadership, we'd be able to resolve issues better and hopefully see more stable governments going into the 2024 election.
How would you define leadership, Dr. Phalatse? The country at this very moment is suffering from a crisis of leadership, from load shedding to the collapse of the SOEs to basic service delivery, which is enshrined in our constitution, which is not being given to the people. What sort of leader does South Africa need? Because we can throw up so many values a leader needs, but what would you say is the core mandate of a leader for a country that is currently in a crisis like we are at this moment?
You're quite right, South Africa is broken. So you need somebody that's going to come with restorative type leadership. You need somebody that's going to come with collaborative type leadership, considering that we're likely to end up with a coalition government at national level. You need somebody that can inspire hope and mobilize the whole nation to be part of a team that's going to rebuild our country. You do require visionary leadership that can captivate the hearts of our people and give them hope that there is a better tomorrow if we can all align and work towards it. That's the type of leadership that you require. You need somebody who can drive a healing process, much like we were doing in the city of Johannesburg. We inherited a broken city. We inherited a city with infrastructure backlogs in excess of probably half a trillion rands. That's what we inherited, and we had to inspire hope in our residents that we can turn the city around. At the same time, we had to manage expectations that it's not going to happen in a year, and so that's the type of leadership you need: realistic, open, honest, transparent, accountable, yet responsible, responsive, a leadership that will follow through, a leadership that's not going to walk away from the electorate.
Dr. Phalatse, service delivery remains a problem in this country. Wherever you go, people are not getting, for example, wastage being collected. Water is a challenge. I mean, the electricity crisis on its own, of course, it's with Eskom, and even if you bring the independent power producers into the party, you still have a sense of challenge. How do you solve the service delivery? Because I know in the city of Johannesburg, you had done all you could, but you do have those challenges, especially when you sit in a multi-party coalition where one does not see eye to eye with each other. So how do you remove all of the political problems within a multi-party coalition and just give basic service delivery to the citizens of South Africa? Again, I'll mention it, enshrined in our constitution.
Yeah, that's where you need a stable coalition. When you have unstable governments, they affect even the work of their administration. And I saw it play out in the city of Johannesburg, where officials were always waiting for the next motion of no confidence or the next change of administration. Even what we have right now is, in fact, not permanent. By his own admission, the current mayor has said this is an interim solution. You know, he's an interim mayor. So the administration is working, but waiting for a new mayor to be elected, and that could potentially come with a change in direction. That can be demoralizing, it's demotivating. So stability is going to be key in getting the administration to work for our governments. That's number one. How do we get that stability? It's about how the electorate votes. That's the other thing. Now, we saw very low voter turnout in the 2021 election. I'm hoping that will improve in 2024. I'm hoping that with all the instability that we're seeing play out, that voters are starting to see how important it is for them to show up. They're showing up for themselves. They're not doing it for those parties, and every vote counts. And I'm hoping that we can do enough voter education ahead of the election to mobilize enough of the voting population to give us stable governments. But also, it's not just about voting, it's about voting wisely. Now, what we've seen play out, and we saw it play out in Tshwane yesterday as well, where a one-seat party got mayorship. That's not democracy. That's not the voice of the people. It's not representative. The party does not have enough votes to occupy such an important office in the municipality, in the capital city of this country. This really says to voters, they need to really apply their minds when they cast their vote. Giving votes to small parties that can in turn use their seats to take over whole governments, virtually ignoring the mandate of the majority of the electorate. There's something unjust about what is happening now, what we're seeing play out in our metros, in our biggest municipalities in this country, something that needs to be addressed as well.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Dr. Mpho Phalatse. We are looking ahead to that DA federal elections that is happening next month at Gallagher Estate. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Dr. Mpho Phalatse. Dr. Phalatse, in an interview you gave with the Mail and Guardian, you said that I do recognize out there that my party, the DA, is indifferent to the plight of black people. Would it be fair to say that the party at this very moment has lost touch with black Africans, especially in the rural communities, with 1 year left to the elections, given that the ANC is starting to lose ground, especially in those communities? How important is it, should you come in, to reconnect with those communities?
So I don't think it's accurate to say the Democratic Alliance is indifferent to the plight of people in rural communities. I do think, though, that there is a challenge with connecting with those communities. It's been my experience as a public rep in the Democratic Alliance that there's a lot that we do for communities that communities aren't even aware of. And I believe that that is our weakness, the fact that we downplay our achievements, the fact that we don't invest enough in connecting with our people around, this is what we're doing for you, and should we govern nationally, this is what we plan to do for you. And yes, the people in rural communities are a good example, and various other communities that don't feel like the DA is really talking to them. But if you look at our policies closely, you realize actually there's a lot in there for these people. If you look at where we govern, what we're already doing, there's a lot actually that's already happening for all communities. But because of this propaganda and this narrative that's been left to prevail for far too long, that the DA is only for minorities, that the DA is only for, you know, certain interest groups. We've simply not invested enough in demonstrating that that narrative is actually false. So no, I don't agree that we're indifferent to the plight of people in rural communities. I do agree, however, that we're not connecting well enough and that we're not showcasing what we're actually doing and what our offer is should we govern at a national level.
I speak to many previously disadvantaged people, mostly black Africans, when the conversation of politics comes up and what is the other alternative. And over the last few months, given what is happening in the country, what you would have seen probably 20 years ago, where black Africans would still have a sense of loyalty, and I use the word loyalty very loosely, towards the ANC. It's changing because they want to see something different. How do you change the perception that the DA is not just a minority white party, but it can serve the interest of every South African, because that is what they want. They want to see a party coming in and serving the interest of every single individual South African.
Fortunately, the Democratic Alliance is already doing a lot where we govern. Even where we're in opposition, we're driving issues that are making a huge difference in the lives of the majority of South Africans. What we're not doing, however, is we're not communicating what we're doing. And that's contributing towards this trust deficit between us and the electorate. We need to communicate better and more intentionally around how we are addressing the needs of black South Africans, poor South Africans, etc. That needs to be an intentional thing that we invest in as a party. As leader of the Democratic Alliance, I will ensure that we package all our successes and that we present them to the electorate in a manner that they can understand. They would be able to also verify that indeed we did drive those solutions. But when you don't show it, people don't see it. You can't assume that people will see it as clearly. That's the first thing. But it's also worthwhile going with our policies to our people and saying, this is what we're offering in this policy. What do you think of it? How do you understand it? There's misunderstandings. There's then an opportunity to clear those and help people to consume it better and understand it better and see how it's actually going to work for them and improve their living circumstances. So just being close to the people, connecting with them, speaking in a language that they understand, breaking things down to the simplest form, including our policies, for instance, policy on land reform, our policy on economic justice. Those are important and key to the constituency that we're not reaching with our message. Where are we losing them? Do we need to translate these policies? Do we need to simplify them, put them in a language that can be understood? That's work that we need to do. And I don't believe that we've done enough to connect, but I do believe that we've got the solutions already.
Does John Steenhuisen walking into a township, does he connect with the people? Because it seems as if maybe there's a sense of disconnect between the current DA leadership and probably black Africans who feel a sense of mistrust towards the DA. So does John Steenhuisen connect with the majority of South Africans as we speak right now?
I don't want to talk about John, because my campaign is not an anti-John campaign.
No, I understand that, but and given that it's 1 year left and this is the DA's chance to seize that majority vote, is he the right person that can connect with black Africans?
I don't want to talk about whether John is the right person. I've put my hand up because I believe I'm the right person. I'm campaigning strongly, hoping that the 2,000 delegates will see that the type of leadership that I will offer the party is the type that is likely to help us connect better with the majority of South Africans and give us a better chance to govern come 2024.
Okay. In modern day politics within the country, there's a lot that needs to be done in order to convince people. One of them, of course, being service delivery, right? We've seen in the city of Cape Town, a colleague of yours, Mr. Jordan Hill-Lewis, do his best, obviously, to try and deliver throughout. It does present challenges, especially in previously disadvantaged communities, and I'm talking about Langa, Khayelitsha, Hanover Park, the more colored and black African areas where there is a challenge of service delivery. You come in, the DA has the power to change all of that. How do you deal with it from a national perspective? Because that's where the challenge comes in. This is not the city of Johannesburg or the city of Cape Town. This is now from a national perspective.
Yeah. So the Democratic Alliance believes that you render services according to service gaps and service needs. So we believe that when you get into a government, you look at which areas are underserved and which areas are receiving services, and you close the gap. And that's how you map your governance plan, which is what we did in the city of Johannesburg as well. When you do that, should there be underserved areas who are previously disadvantaged, they will be taken care of because it would be highlighted that they're not receiving services. Basic services, access to water, access to electricity, access to proper sanitation, roads, human settlements, and so on. I believe that data speaks, doesn't lie, and you must follow the data. Of course, there's complexities. If I take the city of Johannesburg as an example, I've been in the city. There's certain informal settlements that are not on city-owned land, where we can only do so much, but we're not the landowner, for example. There's fiscal challenges, inadequate resources to resolve all the issues. I spoke about our infrastructure backlog in the city of Johannesburg against a tiny capital budget, a shrinking revenue base, people moving off the grid, is affecting our revenue base. The increased cost of living is affecting people's ability to pay their rates and taxes. So that's another huge challenge. Historical issues such as unfunded mandates that have diverted key resources away from core competencies of local government. For instance, in the city of Johannesburg, the arts and culture, sports, heritage, that's more a national provincial competency that as a city we invest a lot in year on year, and we're not receiving the requisite subsidy from either national or provincial government, and that comes, of course, at the expense of providing electricity, etc. So yes, all those things would inform how you approach governance and how you begin to equalize things across the board. I am concerned that we've become the most unequal country in the world since 1994. I am concerned that we're not doing enough to show meaningful redress to the people that deserve it.
How do you take those concerns and make them action, given that budgetary constraints, the culture of corruption that has happened in South Africa, which has taken away money which was meant to be served for the people into the pockets of your elite politicians? How do you change that?
So firstly, it's having the right party in government. I believe that the Democratic Alliance is the right party. We are anti-corruption. We are known to govern well. We've got a good governance brand. And when you vote the Democratic Alliance into government, you are voting in a party that knows how to deal with the challenges on the ground. That's very important. Putting systems in place to root out corruption. In the city of Johannesburg, in our 2016 administration, we established the Group Forensic and Investigation Services Unit under General Shadrach Sibiya, which was the corruption watchdog in the city. And we started rooting out corruption systematically. In this administration, 2021, we established the Financial Misconduct Board, which was meant to, again, ensure that all cases of misconduct are processed and that there is consequence management. What we also did is we invited external experts, so we interviewed people in the finance space and in the legal fraternity to also serve on this board to ensure that there is independence and that there is no avenue to manipulate processes, so people can get away with corruption. Important to do that. I think we've demonstrated in the city of Johannesburg and elsewhere where we govern, in fact, that we are capable of running governments that serve our residents well, that begin to close the gap between the rich and the poor. And yes, more needs to be done. We need more time. We need more resources. Fiscal prudence is important. But I think where we govern, we've been able to demonstrate that given a chance, we can do even more.
After the break, I'll continue my conversation with Dr. Phalatse ahead of that DA federal elections happening next month in Madrid. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm in conversation with Dr. Mpho Phalatse. Dr. Phalatse, coalition governments, you've been part of it. You are no stranger to coalition governments. How do you think it will pan out in the national elections should the ANC lose complete majority? Given the voter roll at this very moment, it seems as if they're heading towards losing majority power if things are where they are in this country. The concern is that it's very unstable from a metro perspective. Do you see a stability in national government?
I believe that with the right leadership in all the various political parties, we can see stability. But I also believe that with a greater emphasis on voter education ahead of the election, greater emphasis on the need for voters to actually turn out and cast their vote, I believe that we'll have a better chance at stability. Also, voter education around what happens when you give your vote to very small parties, how you split the opposition, and how you end up with a fragmented government. In Nelson Mandela Bay, currently we have a 10-party coalition government. It becomes untenable at some point. We do need to look forward to coalitions that are smaller, more manageable, with fewer issues to deal with. And I'm hoping that we can assist the electorate in the time between now leading up to the election to understand how that actually works and to be able to appropriate their votes accordingly.
Dr. Phalatse, you've always spoke about honesty and the honesty with dealing with other parties. In the city of Johannesburg, you had pushed for honesty with the EFF, as you know, to work with them to try and make the city manageable. How important is it that on a national level that honesty is maintained in order to make sure that the interests of the people, instead of the interest of the egos within different political parties, are made to work?
So this is a highly contentious issue. It's highly contentious in my party. It's highly contentious within our traditional constituency. But I've also been misconstrued a lot where the EFF is concerned. I have never suggested that as a party we should enter into a partnership with the EFF. I believe that the EFF would be the first to say it would never work out. Ideologically, which is too different, and it would just be too cumbersome a relationship to manage. However, I'm aware that there are many instances where we govern in minority governments with the help of a healthy relationship with the likes of the EFF and other parties in our councils. And that's really where I'm pushing for honesty here. We see it in Ekurhuleni, we see it in Mogale City, we see it in the West Rand. We've seen it in the city of Johannesburg, and I understand where apprehension comes from, because when we had it in Johannesburg in the 2016 administration, it was not managed well, and as a result there is a lot of apprehension around us working with the EFF. But we've also seen that in instances like in Ekurhuleni, in Mogale City, in the West Rand, where it is well managed, where there are set parameters, where there's alignment with values and principles, but there are areas of coexistence. And I give an example. I was MMC Health and Social Development. I was responsible for rolling out health programs, amongst others. One of the programs that I rolled out in partnership with the EFF was actually the rollout of mobile clinic services in the city of Johannesburg. The EFF has a strong footprint in informal settlements. And they picked up that there's actually service gaps where informal settlements are often far from clinic services, and they came up with this brilliant idea of having mobile clinic services go out and serve those areas. Now, when it came to council as a motion, we looked at it and we thought, actually, this is a good idea. This is something we would like to back and support. And so we supported that motion in council. It went through, it was approved, and as the MMC responsible, I was responsible for its implementation. And by the end of the 3 years that we were in government, we had 10 mobile clinics that go out and service our people, plus an 11th one that was a donation from PPC Cement. That's an example of how, in spite of our ideological differences, you can do things collaboratively to serve the residents on the ground. Where the EFF steps out of line, I'm not suggesting that we should align ourselves with the type of anarchy that we sometimes see play out. Where the EFF is concerned, we see it in our SONA, we see it in various SOPAs and so on. I'm not suggesting that we align ourselves with such behavior. Some of the utterances that come from the EFF, some of the ideology that they stand for, I'm not suggesting that we align ourselves with that. But if we put residents first, there are things that we can deliver for our residents together. And that's the message that I'm talking about. But also that it's already happening elsewhere where we govern, and we just need to be honest that yes, it's happening, but within a controlled environment with set parameters where we can still observe our values and principles.
You speak of ideological differences. The DA has its ideologies based on its mandate, the EFF, the ANC, Patriotic Alliance, now I'm going to start bringing in those parties, Al-Jama. They've got different ideological differences, but how do you make sure that those are pushed aside and that the people are seen as the first priority? Because, again, bringing the Constitution, it's the Constitution that governs all of us, and the Constitution says citizens deserve the best from those that are in power.
Yeah. When you co-govern, it's not even about setting them aside. It's about opening up debate. It's about putting your points across to each other and finding common ground. And it will involve compromise because you're not going to agree 100% on how matters should be addressed. A good example, taking from our short stint in the city of Johannesburg, was how you manage undocumented migrants in the city. Now, Johannesburg being a hub of migration in the country, we had a huge challenge of undocumented migrants, and towards the end of our tenure, short stint, we actually had a very successful interaction with the Minister of Home Affairs and Provincial Home Affairs, where we started putting in place different work streams to begin to address this issue. But when we started putting together our government, it was a contentious issue because you had Action SA, you had the PA, you had the DA, and then you had the other parties somewhere in between. With Action SA and the PA feeling like every undocumented migrant must just go, you know. With the DA feeling, yes, we need to regularize migration in the country and in the city, bearing in mind, of course, that is a national competency, partnering with Home Affairs and looking at how we process people. And the DA's approach was profile undocumented migrants. There's different types. There's people who would have been trafficked into the country who are victims, who need help. There are people who came into the country for whatever reason, who don't have the money to go back home, who would like to be assisted with repatriation. There are so many different categories categories. Yes, you've got your criminal elements, and we need to highlight that and deal with them accordingly through the criminal justice system. We need to engage in bilaterals with affected countries or countries involved so that we can jointly also begin to address these issues. And Minister Motsoaledi, I'm aware, is driving similar initiatives, for instance, with Lesotho, and that's work that as Johannesburg we were going to begin to be a part of. And that was the DA's approach, more conservative, more sober-minded, saying let's profile, let's classify, let's deal with each case in a sober manner, as opposed to having this blanket approach where we victimize innocent people sometimes. So that's one example. Now, how did we deal with it is through conversation. Firstly, to recognize that this is an area where we don't necessarily agree in terms of the approach, and this is an area where we're going to have to compromise and find a middle ground. We approached external agents to play a mediation role to help us find that middle ground. We leaned towards academic solutions because, again, data does not lie, facts don't lie. You're interested to know what's international best practice, what are some of the international legislation that you have to observe, and so on. You're able to also attract resources, and we managed to do that. We attracted about, I think it was about $2 million USD from a global agent that said, here's money that you can use to start to develop policy towards addressing your migration problem in the city of Johannesburg. So yes, it takes a lot of work, but it starts with a recognition that we don't agree here, and a recognition that we're going to have to find middle ground, and we're going to have to compromise and agree on what's going to be our collective position, because when we govern as a collective. It's no longer about the individual parties.
Dr. Phalatse, before we go to the break, the current crisis that we're dealing with, load shedding, needs no introduction of what is currently happening at this moment. You come in, you're part of this coalition government with big decisions that have to be made. We saw Andre de Ruyter's interview last week on another broadcaster, and obviously he had spoken about corruption that is part and parcel of Eskom. How do we deal with the load shedding issue right now? Because you speak to one person, they've got a different issue, another person a different issue. So how do we, as a country, and specifically leadership within South Africa, come 2024 and we see a change, make sure that load shedding is a thing of the past, or we can have some sort of stable energy for the country?
So first of all, we need to take back our entities that are responsible for electricity supply, whether it's Eskom or City Power at the level of Joburg, for an example. We need to take them back, root out maladministration, root out corruption, and bring in the right governance in those spaces. A lot of the challenges can really be resolved. So I'll speak to what we did in the city of Johannesburg. Very early on in our tenure, I think it was in May 2022, we hosted the first ever energy indaba in the city, where we invited independent power producers for the first time, saying, come help us meet our residents' electricity needs. Very successful. In fact, the event was oversubscribed, and we were able to, at the end of that, start a process of bringing in independent power producers. We issued a request for proposals in November, following our reinstatement after the illegal ousting, so there was a bit of a delay, and it closed in February, and I'm hoping that they're continuing now and processing those applications and starting to bring in independent power producers. We had identified in Johannesburg that we need to generate an additional 500 megawatts of energy in order to offset load shedding in Johannesburg. And we were well on our way to achieving that. On the day of my ousting in the morning, we also announced a plan with City Power to offset load shedding by 3 stages. It's a plan that was going to cost the city 401 million rands. We didn't have the money at the time, but we had plans to bring the money in and start implementing that plan. I'm saying this to say there are solutions. If you've got political will, you've got the right government, you've got a leadership that can drive solutions, that can inspire confidence and hope, and mobilize resources in their administration, root out corruption, ensure there's no maladministration, you really can resolve these issues, and I believe the same is true for Eskom.
After the break, we wrap up the conversation with Dr. Phalatse. We're going to be discussing next year's election and just how South Africa could change come next year. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to Talking Point. We're in our last segment with our discussion with Dr. Mpho Phalatse, looking ahead to next month's DA federal elections that is happening at the Gallagher estate in Madrid. Dr. Phalatse, trust within the ANC is starting to fall. People believe that it's not the party that was once voted in 1994, given allegations of corruption, given the fact that they've probably lost touch with many South Africans, all of the challenges that have been presented and their lack of failure to go ahead and address them. How important is the next year for the Democratic Alliance in order to make sure that you are truly the main opposition party for the ANC?
The Congress, the Federal Congress for the Democratic Alliance on the 1st and 2nd of April is very much going to decide the future of South Africa. It's not about electing a leader for the Democratic Alliance. It's about electing the type of leader that is likely to position the Democratic Alliance to be the next government come 2024. We need our residents, we need our voters throughout South Africa to see the DA as a credible alternative to the ANC. We need to close whatever gaps that exist between us and the electorate that bring whatever doubt that there may be, that we may be that credible alternative. So yes, I believe that the next 14 months, 13, 12, 13, 14 months is crucial. I believe that there is a window of opportunity. I believe that we should not squander the opportunity, and it is upon us to make sure that we indeed don't squander it. I believe I know what needs to happen. We need to install the right leadership in the Democratic Alliance. We need to use the time ahead of the elections to really connect with the electorate and to present to them what we've done for them in the various parts of the country where we've governed so far, present to them our offer to them in our policies. Well, should we govern at national government? Break it down, make sure they understand it, and make sure that they move with us and ultimately give us the mandate that we require to lead a coalition government in 2024.
Dr. Mpho Phalatse comes in as the DA leader. No party is without its faults. How do you fix the faults of the DA to use that connection with the people who had previously not trusted the DA in terms of its mandates and in terms of its policies? How do you change that perception for the people?
Well, it's all about connection, messaging. It's all about intentionally investing. And I believe that's quite easy to do once you've got a leadership that's invested in that sort of thing. It's really not rocket science. You know, it's about understanding the language and the currency of the people on the ground and connecting with them at that level.
Do you feel that the DA has enough to have a massive influence within a coalition government, if we are to have a coalition government, in order to make sure that when it comes to the pure decision-making powers, it is done in the right manner and in a manner which is incorruptible and for the service of the people?
I do believe so, yes, but I believe that what happens at the Congress and what happens subsequent to the Congress is also important. I do believe that everybody has blind spots, and I believe it's important to be able to introspect and say, you know, everybody keeps saying this about us, and we don't agree, but could there be an element of truth? Could there be something we genuinely need to address? There's nothing wrong with introspecting and self-correcting if you have to, and I think that as a party we do need to engage in that kind of exercise in the interest of better collaboration with other parties ahead of the elections.
Dr. Phalatse, I have to bring this question up. Musi Maimane, Mr. Herman Mashaba, they had occupied very senior positions within the DA, like yourself. One was a mayor, the other one was the leader. Musi Maimane in 2019 had said that there was a culture of fear within the party. Is that something that concerns you as we speak right now?
Yes, it is a huge concern. I don't think I realized just how prevalent it is until recently, as I've started campaigning now and I've started going into the provinces and engaging with delegates. It is there, and it is a huge concern for me. We are a liberal party. We should not operate in a climate of fear. It is something that we need to address, and we need to address it urgently.
Dr. Phalatse, the relationship with Helen Zille, I don't know what your relationship is with her, but she's still, according to many people, holds still a stranglehold within the Democratic Alliance. Is it important to keep a strong relationship with her if you are to become the DA leader and potentially the leader of this country, should the electorate put their trust within the Democratic Alliance?
So firstly, Helen currently holds the position of chairperson of our Federal Council, and all those positions are up for re-election. So whether or not she will stand again, I'm not sure. So I don't know how she will emerge following the April 1 and 2 Congress. Should she emerge in a role where I need to work with her? Yes. In fact, I've worked very well with Helen as mayor of Johannesburg. You'll recall that Helen was mayor of the city of Cape Town when it had a 7-party coalition. And so in the entire party, she was the one person that I could relate to and that I could run to for advice whenever I was having challenges with the coalition. So we worked very closely together. We had an open line of communication. We often engaged on challenges and so on. I don't foresee that I would have a challenge working with Helen or anybody else in the party for that matter, should I emerge as federal leader of the DA.
She's seen as a seasoned politician. I mean, she's been there, done that. How important, if she does occupy the federal chairperson position again, would her sort of wisdom help you, should you be elected as the DA leader, in trying to get the DA position as in a stronghold for the country itself?
So Helen and I don't see eye to eye on everything.
Yes, I do know that.
But I also recognize her experience. Now, I recognize she's smart and she's quite a strategist, and I admire that about her. And I've been able to glean a lot from her in my time as mayor. Where we disagree, though, we've been able to disagree respectfully and openly, and we're able to move on from that disagreement, even if we have to agree to disagree. And I really value that type of relationship, and I anticipate that that's the kind of relationship we would have in whatever context we both end up in ahead following the Congress.
One final question, Dr. Phalatse. I started the segment by saying the importance of the next 12 to 14 months. We look at the ANC, we look at President Cyril Ramaphosa. It seems that maybe his time as president of the country, given the situation that is happening, given what you read, I don't take social media seriously, but the people on the streets are starting to lose that sort of respect and credibility for the ANC. As the DA, positioning yourself right now to come in and change that perception that you guys are the party to take over, how do you make sure that you do the right things in the next 12 months, that is campaigning and of course putting out a message out there that speaks to the people of South Africa?
Again, I will emphasize that data never lies. When you craft even your messaging, it's important that you do so informed by data. It's important that you work closely even with behavioral scientists who understand how or what kind of message would resonate with the person on the ground. You're not altering or changing your message, but you are positioning yourself to connect better by making sure that you craft it specifically for your target audience. And you have different audiences, you need to understand that as well. Understand the language of the different audiences and understand how you need to connect with all those. It's not rocket science. The expertise is already there. It's available. We just need to decide that that's what we want to do, invest in it, and it will be done. We have a good governance brand. It's known by all. It's undisputed. We need to make sure that we continue to uphold it and we continue to sell our successes to everyone so that they are aware. We've got policies that, in my view, are the best of all political parties in the country. Our offering is really, really what our residents and our citizens need. We need to ensure that they understand our policies, that first they have access to them. Our policies are on our website. Not many people visit our website. We need to make sure they are accessible in a language and at a level that people can understand. But we also need to be open to hear back from the various constituencies on where they're uncomfortable. We need to be able to make requisite changes if it is necessary.
Dr. Phalatse, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us here on Hilaal TV on Talking Point, and we'd like to wish you all the best for the upcoming elections.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all we have for you here on Talking Point. My guest today was Dr. Mpho Phalatse. She will be running for the DA leader candidate position, which will be taking place, the elections, which will be taking place next month on April the 1st and 2nd at the Gallagher Estate in Midrand. From myself, Farhaaz Patel, and the rest of the production team here at Hilaal TV, we say Jazakallah to you for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.